All right, so why don't we go ahead and get started. Hi there and welcome everyone. My name is Jeannie Myung and I am the Director of Policy Research at PACE, Policy Analysis for California Education. I'm delighted to facilitate today's webinar featuring research on newcomer education and support in California. Today's webinar is an opportunity to draw attention to newly arrived immigrant students in California, students who manifest incredible resilience and rich assets and backgrounds who carry the immigrant story of America. So the work you'll hear about today emerges from a unique multi-sector partnership that PACE facilitated, the Research Practice Policy Partnership on Newcomer Education. The idea for the partnership emerged with an acknowledgement of newcomer education as an underdeveloped arena in terms of policy research and practice. And I say underdeveloped, particularly when juxtaposed with the high level of unique challenges that these students face. And we were driven by this notion that the true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. We also recognized that there was good work occurring in the field, but it was generally siloed without coordination across sectors. So our goal was to coordinate priorities and align efforts to design and develop policies, research agendas, and practical approaches that improve the experiences of newcomer students in their transition into California schools and society, with an emphasis on how schools and other student and family serving systems can align to ensure positive experiences and outcomes for these students. So I do want to pause to give special credit to Tanya Lieberman and Naomi Andrasik, who first kind of conceptualized this type of multi-sectoral work that PACE was privileged to bring to life, and also the Sobrato Philanthropies for their support and trust in us in this process. So our group first met in February of 2022, and we were thrilled to have assembled an outstanding group of leaders from the field who represented prominent English learner researchers from top universities, state leaders in education policy, and also innovative practitioners educating newcomer students from across the state. And PACE's role in this partnership was to broker and facilitate the group to surface the needs and opportunities in the field, and to promote the development of new knowledge and approaches to improving experiences and outcomes for newcomer students. So we met 3 times virtually and convened once in person, and we are sharing 4 of the products, among others, from this multi-sectoral collaboration. 2 other publications that I want to mention from the partnership are not being featured on this webinar today due to lack of time, but I strongly recommend that you read them. The first is a synthesis of an academic publication by Ilana Umansky and co-authors on the English language proficiency development trajectories of newcomer students. And the other is a moving case study of the extraordinary effort to lead a temporary school, to create a temporary school for newly arrived unaccompanied minors in San Diego County, and an emergency intake center there. Links to both of those publications will be in the chat. Okay, so with that, I'm so pleased to introduce our terrific panelists today, who will be introduced in order. Sam Finn is currently the Director of Newcomer Policy and Practice at Californians Together. He is also leading the effort of field development and newcomer education and support in California nationally. He comes to us by way of Oakland Unified School District. Magali Lavidens is the Levy Presidential Endowed Chair in Ethics and Moral Leadership at Loyola Marymount University School of Education, and she's also the Executive Director of the Center of Equity for English Learners. She and her research team did field work in San Juan, we'll hear about, to lift up some of the promising practices there. She and her colleagues, Linda Kaminsky and Elvira Armas, are the co-authors of the report San Juan Unified Newcomer Support Promising Practices. We have Lauren Markham on the webinar today. She's a writer whom some of you hopefully know as the author of The Faraway Brothers, a beautiful book that I personally love about twin brothers who escaped violence in El Salvador to build their lives in California. She is also the co-lead of the Learning Lab at Oakland International High School, who's been with the school since its early years. Eager to hear about her insights from her brief of community school in service of newcomer students, lessons from Oakland International. We're so happy to pair Lauren's case study of Oakland International with the work of David Hansen, who has a wealth of teaching as well as administrative expertise in developing programs and school structures that support newcomer education. He is the co-lead of the Learning Lab at Oakland International and the author of guidance for district administrators serving newcomer students. So kind of just walk through our agenda. I'll note that we'll have time for Q&A at the end. Please type any questions or comments you have for our panelists into the Q&A box. We also encourage kind of upvote questions that are relevant to you, and our panelists may get a chance to type in their responses over the course of the webinar. If not, we may elevate them at the end during the Q&A. And I think with that, we will hand it over to Sam Finn, who will present his findings from his analysis of the state of the field for newcomer education in California.
Great. And thank you so much, Jeannie. Let's see if the clicking works. It does. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you all. I'm Sam Finn. I'm the Director of Newcomer Policy and Practice at Californians Together, a consultant for Oakland Unified School District and some other organizations working in newcomer education. Today, oops, Jeannie, how do I go back? It's okay, we don't need that. Oh, perfect. Today, I'm excited to give you a quick summary of the overall landscape and opportunities for growth for newcomer education in California. And this research is based on a special data request of the CDE, analysis of government documents, interviews with California school districts, and of course, literature review. This analysis is also contextualized and informed by my own experience as a classroom teacher of newcomers, as an education policy analyst, and as a consultant for the California Newcomer Education and Wellbeing Program. So I'm going to start by just going over the broad landscape that our students are currently facing. And in the second section, I'll be going over best practices and recommendations. So first, who are newcomers? Well, there's no standard definition across the field, but we can generally think of them as immigrant students in their first years of U.S. schooling. They're a very diverse group. They vary by their home language and English proficiency, their socioeconomic status, whether or not they have interrupted formal education, refugee or asylee status, documented or undocumented, with family or coming on their own. In this presentation, it'll be good to keep in mind the federal Title III immigrant student definition, as that's where our data will come from. And that's defined as 3 years or less in U.S. schools and not born in any U.S. state. So let's take a look at the law that we currently have governing educational entitlements for immigrant students. Lau v. Nichols, Chinese American students in San Francisco, that essentially says that schools must take affirmative steps to make sure that meaningful access can be given to curriculum. It can't just be everyone getting the same thing. You have to modify your instructional program if students have limited English proficiency. Plyler v. Doe guarantees educational access regardless of documentation. And Castaneda versus Pickard gives us a three-pronged test for effective instruction for English learners. Is it based on sound educational theory? Is it implemented with sufficient resources? And is it proven effective? The first two of these decisions are largely followed within the country. A lot of districts would fail the Castaneda three-pronged standard, unfortunately. And this is a challenge in that newcomers get lost in the larger English learner subgroup, which they are generally identified with in data. Now, nationally, newcomers are a little less than 20% of the total English learner population and 1/8 in California. And they tend to have a much lower English proficiency level than the average English learner. The modal English learner today in California tends to be someone who's born in this country, who speaks English and Spanish, and can functionally access the mainstream curriculum, but still needs those supports to get to higher levels of academic proficiency. Whereas newcomers are often students who genuinely lack those basic English skills that allow them to access mainstream instruction. And so they're not well served by current EL accountability standards and curricula, and their needs often go unmet. And sorry, just clicking through here. Here we go. And so if you talk to districts and staff around the state, you find that there's a lot of concern about our outcomes for newcomers. And by the way, we don't have really good data on outcomes for newcomers. There are bright spots around, but essentially most schools, districts, and state agencies lack the expertise to provide effective education at scale for our students. We know that there are good instructional materials, models, and guidance out there, but they're limited in their scope and they are somewhat spread out and not cohesive. We also don't really have that data that exists for district planning, policymaking, or research. And if a group is absent from the data, they're absent from the educational equity discourse, they're absent from policy discussions, they're absent from district planning. And the upshot of this is that many students in the end in California simply cannot access a free and appropriate public education. So how many students are we talking about that are facing this? Well, it's a pretty large group to be so systematically underserved. So a couple reference points. In the year of analysis in this paper, there were about 150,000 newcomers in California, which is a lot. So let's think about how much that is. That's more than students in 23 California counties combined. It's more than students in 8 separate US states. So just imagine for a moment if we didn't really have achievement data or anything meaningful for 23 California counties or Vermont or Delaware. And what if we didn't have instructional access? That would be pretty bad. Well, that's the situation we face right now with our kids in California. A little closer look at the demographics. Despite being that very large group in aggregate, just 1 in 40 California students is a newcomer, 2.5% of all students. 92% are English learners. 43% speak Spanish as a home language, so that there's significantly more language diversity within the newcomer population than the larger L population, and the majority of our newcomers are socioeconomically disadvantaged. I'm going to go over funding very briefly, but that's all to say that the legislature has made great strides in appropriating some limited funding and is making a difference. We need more. Federally, the Title III Immigrant Student Program is supposed to set aside money for immigrant students for LEAs. It's not quite meeting legislative intent. An example of this you can read in the paper is that in the year of analysis, Cupertino Unified got about $300,000 in funding, and Oakland Unified and LA got nothing. And Cupertino has 4% of their kids socioeconomically disadvantaged. It's Apple headquarters, and Oakland and LA are not quite that situation. So funding is not quite there yet. Let's take a look now at what the best practices are that we're finding in newcomer education and what we can do to grow the field. So I like to divide educational practice or district practice for newcomers into 2 general categories, the inside of school and outside of school, which we can think of schooling and basic needs. So if we take a look at schooling, there's a lot of factors that district leaders, staff, teachers need to consider. First, you need to think about your program structure. Are you going to have specialized schools, academies, pull-out classes, summer schools, etc.? Admin practices. What's transcript analysis look like? Where do you place students? What's enrollment look like? Assessment and criteria. How are we looking at growth? Who is a newcomer? Instructional approach. What's the pedagogy? What's the training? Curriculum. Are teachers getting materials, or do they just have to make everything themselves, which doesn't go well, I can tell you. And social emotional development. How are we finding ways for newcomers to genuinely be part of their school communities, to feel safe and welcome and lower that affect that is so necessary for language learning and psychological safety? The next thing that we need to consider with newcomers, many of whom are socioeconomically disadvantaged, coming to a new community, is how to make sure their basic needs are met. Because if basic needs are not met, schooling becomes irrelevant. What's great is we find so many districts that are able to innovate, and when they engage with families in the community and they collaborate with nonprofit and government actors, they can provide for a wide variety of needs. Those legal services to get through the really Byzantine immigration system, the food we need to function, housing, school supplies, medical care, mental health, particularly important for many newcomers who have undergone trauma. These are all things that can be provided with the right structures, the right collaboration, and often the right support from the state or philanthropic sector. There's a number of recommendations in the report. I'm just going to uplift 3 I think are particularly meaningful here. The first is that the state really could use increased capacity in this area with dedicated staffing and collaboration. Essentially, the CDE is relatively underfunded as a state education agency. And to fully serve this population better, it probably needs a director level role to actually take the time to lead this work. They need the funding for that. That'll help them collaborate with CDSS. That'll help them collaborate with the nonprofits in the field, the districts, et cetera. They're making efforts right now. They're doing a great job. They need more support and help. The second thing that I would recommend is that we need to include newcomers in our state data systems. AB 714 is getting us started there. Hopefully that passes. That'll get them just in as an aggregate total with country of origin. We also need socioeconomic status, we need home language, and we ultimately need achievement because we don't really know enough about our outcomes, which is a real problem. Finally, we recommend that the state support the development of the field. And by that, we mean developing common frameworks, nomenclature. It means figuring out how we can curate a cohesive ecosystem. And this is something that will require relatively little investment from the state, really leading the work from the CDE and CDSS, but really bringing together all of these LEAs, these nonprofits, these university researchers, all of these people who care and want to do the work. Can we tie all of our expertise, all of our assets together and make something that works for everyone? This work is starting to a small extent with the Cal New Community of Practice, which I have the pleasure of being a part of. But we need more support in that area if we can get it. A little call to action. If you want to get involved and stay involved, there's two networks that I would invite you to join. The first is the California Newcomer Network, which is started by the great educator Efrain Tovar. It is a series of discussions and expert speakers on newcomer education. It's a great way to get up to date. The Cal New program is partnering with CAN this year to co-host 5 webinar events, which will be published soon. If you sign up, you'll get emails for those and invites. And the second network I would invite you to is the National Newcomer Network, recently formed and chaired by Alejandra Vasquez Bauer of the Century Foundation and Shilene Cruz Gonzalez of Californians Together. This is a group that meets bi-monthly to discuss how we can nationally collaborate in our advocacy to move the field forward and improve things for newcomers. This will be especially important for fixing those Title III immigrant student allocations. So please sign up there if you're interested. And I'll just leave with a couple parting takeaways just to reinforce. Newcomers are an often neglected subgroup within the larger English learner group. You can think of them as, in some ways, a marginalized minority within another larger marginalized minority. Second, there are about 150,000 newcomers in California. That's more than 23 California counties combined. That's a big deal. They need a bigger space in policy, in the discourse and practice. And finally, what do newcomers need? They need better instruction, they need basic needs support, and they need that inclusion and representation in data systems. I put 2 little icons here because I'm an elementary teacher and I love visuals. Glass half full, glass half empty. Glass half empty, newcomers are not being served. They've been warehoused in my classroom. There are many who are not graduating. We don't know how bad it is. We're not upholding our basic commitments. Glass half full, it's better than it's ever been before. And everything we do, there's so much low-hanging fruit, builds things better for everyone. And there's so much to do. That last little graphic is building the field. We can do that together by joining the California Newcomer Network and the National Newcomer Network. I really believe in time we can build a cohesive, unified framework of resources, instruction, and nomenclature that legitimizes newcomer education as an area of investment, support, and best practice. So thank you very much for that speed run through summary of a 30+ page report, and I'll turn it back over to Jeannie.
Thanks, Sam. We're glad to have started with the big picture of newcomer policy and practice. From there, we will zoom in to some promising practices for newcomers in San Juan Unified School District. a Cal New grantee. So with that, we'll transition to Magali to share insights from her team's site visit and analysis of practices in San Juan.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. First to PACE for the convening of the research policy practice partnership, because it really is through this mechanism that we were able to come away with all the learnings, we come away with the great policy work and really build upon the landscape analysis and go a bit more deeply into the work that we are building in the field. And in this case, we're also so grateful to the San Juan Unified School District leadership, the Newcomer program leaders in particular, for opening their doors to be able to learn more about what it really meant to actualize some of the work, some of the recommendations that were uplifted in the previous presentation. And I need one more access. There we go. This was the intent of our work together, to share highlights from what we learned from San Juan Unified. And in this presentation, my colleagues Linda Kaminsky and Elvira and I had an opportunity to really build upon this field, to uplift those promising practices, but also to share what the challenges were, because what you'll hear at the end of the presentation is that when we share promising practices, it's going more deeply into the work, but also to be able to explore what some of the challenges were so others can learn from them. They may not be the specific challenges that we observed, that we heard from in San Juan Unified, but also could be generative in nature, because context matters. And in this case, we're very specific and localized into the San Juan Unified approach to building newcomer programs. We know that San Juan is the 5th largest immigrant enrolling district in the state. This is the number of newcomers they have. They also have a diverse newcomer population, representing not just Spanish-speaking newcomer students, but refugees and immigrants from Afghanistan who speak Dari and Pashto, Russian immigrants. And we really wanted to delve more deeply by understanding more about the trajectory of their implementation of newcomer programs, understanding as one of the early implementers and grantees from the Cal New program, which was funded in 2018. We wanted to hear from all the voices in the field. The only voices we were not able to tap into during this brief case study research project that we did was from the students, which I think is something that we really need to build in the field and we'll have an opportunity in the future to do. But we really wanted to hear from the administrators, the teachers, the community-based organization leaders, the community liaisons about what were those successes and challenges, and what are their recommendations for others who are also implementing newcomer programs. We draw upon 3 broad areas of the research base and a theoretical lens through which we came to understand and analyze the perspectives of our participants. We know Sam alluded to the fact that we need to know more about newcomer education, but there is a growing body of literature, some of which is housed right here in the PACE website, about the best approaches that we can understand in implementing newcomer programs and providing newcomers with the best educational. And the first is really an assets-based approach, knowing the impact of transnational immigration patterns, knowing about the importance of pedagogies and practices that can really connect to their experiences and build from all of the needs of newcomer students. We know that we need to continue to build systems level support for English learners, but particularly for the specific needs of newcomers in building the capacity of educators to have in a system at the state level, at the local district level, at the LEA level, and at the classroom and school levels about what is a shared and articulated vision for newcomer education. And we also know that comprehensive programs and instruction for English learners need to be intentional and purposefully designed with these students in mind. And from the lens through which we looked at the data that we collected, it was really about understanding the intersectional aspects of race, power, class, and socioeconomic status along with this approach of critical multilingualism and the approach that we do in the curriculum practices. And it's through those lenses that we really came to analyze and interpret the data that we collected here. You see here, we had a wonderful opportunity not just to do the interviews, but to go to San Juan Unified School District. The timing of this in summer of 2022 was during the time that they were implementing a summer school for middle and high school newcomer students. And we were able to visit at this particular time of year where they were having instructional programs during the summer specifically targeted to these students. We were able to meet with the numbers of teachers, the number of administrators, community-based organization partners, that whole community. And we were also able to collect a number of artifacts, of documents that San Juan Unified has collected, that house, to be able to build upon our understanding and knowledge of what it really meant to deliver this kind of instructional program. We visited those classrooms in the summer school program, and we used an observation protocol aligned with the newcomer research that I just mentioned. We also looked at student artifacts and the work that they did. We came to know that in that summer, there were 379 students participating in the summer school program. We were able to look at and examine the curriculum and lesson plans, other instructional artifacts that I just mentioned. We looked at the curriculum for newcomer students. We looked at the ELD programming, and we looked at community sponsors, which is a unique aspect of what San Juan did to really support ongoing English language development for these students. We looked at course data patterns and course schedules for these students along the way. So what were some of our findings? And these were some of the most compelling things. And we share them as promising practices, right? These are not the definitive practices. They're very localized, but they're very generative. And the first that we wanted to uplift is this idea of building on community cultural wealth. So many of the administrators, the teachers, really focus on listening to the families, listening to the community liaisons, listening to the students. And in order to create programs, it was expanding this notion of the village, that it takes a village, but it's broadening the aspect of the village from not just within the classroom, within the school site, but into the community. And in the ways in which they did this was to really leverage the wealth, the cultural and linguistic community wealth of parents, and support their leadership development. They also expanded their networks of support to other community-based organizations who were able to provide such invaluable support, such as medical checkups, equipment for sports, counseling and well-being, and other kinds of community service that Sam referred to in regards to the social emotional support and the basic needs of the immigrant communities, the specific immigrant communities that were here in San Juan Unified. So this act of listening first before taking any action really became a promising practice that we really wanted to uplift in our findings. The second promising practice was really about the idea of differentiating and braiding funds. That matching dollars to need is the equity stance that we heard from our leaders, our administrators, and from our teachers to be able to look at multiple funding sources. The CalNew funding was indeed a significant funding source for the San Juan Unified School District, but it really was not sufficient at that time. So Title III that was mentioned before and other funding sources, Title I, were really leveraged to really make sure that the needs of newcomer students and their families were really maximized in depth and in breadth. So taking that stance about really having that keen analytic budgetary eye to really look at those kinds of resources with the needs of the academic supports and the community mental health resources really became a promising practice of what we found. And there's a lot of the details here. I'm really focusing broadly on our key findings around what these promising practices are. But a lot of the stories and the voices about the how-to became very prominent and really clear in and across the interviews that we did and across documents that we reviewed. This third promising practice builds on this trajectory of building educator capacities. The intentionality of examining and re-examining curricular design, ELD, is something that San Juan has been trying to do even before the more recent newcomer arrivals came to their community. That they really have had an intensive effort and an ongoing effort to continuously improve educator capabilities to teach and support newcomer students. What did this mean? It means that from the moment a student may walk into a school site, it's really focusing on making sure that who's there at the front door, welcoming families and communities, speak the languages. These were the community liaisons role who are at the front office to ensure a welcoming environment. To be able to see the faces through those visual portraits, those monochromatic portraits that I shared on the earlier slide and that you see in the brief, to be able to see the voices of the diverse newcomer population that is in San Juan Unified. It's really the intent to offer teachers an opportunity to learn, not necessarily expansively, but to learn the languages of the communities. So they offered extra courses for teachers to learn Dari and Pashto, not proficiently, but to really demonstrate what is a warm and welcoming environment when educators, not just the community liaisons, make an attempt to really learn the language to communicate at even a very basic level. It really was focused on redesigning their ELD program. This has been a long-standing effort to be able to look at the type of offerings, the course placement strategies, and the professional development that accompanies both designated ELD instruction, meaning targeted ELD instruction at the level at which the students are, coupled with the content area instruction with his integrated ELD. And really, this is, again, an ongoing practice and an ongoing effort and initiative of the district to be able to provide all secondary teachers in particular the opportunity to really understand integrated ELD. And with the diversity of newcomer students, Sam mentioned the diversity that newcomer students are not really tracked, but there's great diversity within this population, including students who have more formal schooling in their countries of origin and those who have less formal schooling. And so how to really grapple with, in an intentional approach to coming together to design and redesign a comprehensive ELD program. And finally, really about reconnecting back to student voice, to learning more, that listening approach, to build in cultural knowledge for the whole community about who their newcomer students are, as the adaptation of newcomer students population have shifted over the years in the district. I alluded to the practice with the systems approach about looking at and designing newcomer programs and placement strategies. So there were multiple layers, and this quote here is really significant of the idea of being systematic and intentional and really having graduation as a target for all newcomer students district-wide. And the fact that there is, and this quote, we selected it intentionally because there is no singular magic bullet approach. It is a constant, ongoing, sustained effort to really understand the entire community, the population of newcomer students. Everything from attendance to course schedule, progress to graduation, but also the health and well-being of the students. And the academic progress of those students, we saw that so much also in the summer program, where we saw more experienced newcomer students who were the tutors, the teacher assistants, who were paid during the summer to support the newcomer students who were in the summer school intensive program in that summer of 2022. So the community that came together to design the systemic approach was evident in the LCAPs, and where we see at some levels of granularity how the scheduling occurred and what those practices are. Many of these documents are also in the appendices of our report that you see here that Sean has put in the chat box. We also wanted to uplift the enrollment and the experiences during the summer session practices as in and of itself a promising practice, offering summer intensive supports. This is not a novel idea, but really targeted to all those language groups that you see here in terms of how that curriculum was developed for the summer, who were the participants, and also how they expanded it. So there were community building experiences, and some of the cultural transitions that we heard from really took place in that unique PE class. So because there were diverse cultural differences in who even got to play together in physical education spaces, and how that opportunity also became a language learning opportunity, came from the voices of the community liaisons who were delivering the physical education activities during the summer. And who were the support providers? On the column to the right, where we indicate who in the program structure of summer school were the support providers, summer school also became a place to really build educator capabilities for new teachers of newcomers. It became a recruitment strategy for new teachers to come in, and the voices of teachers were very clear about how they were really learning how to provide ELD instruction to newcomer students through the intensive tutoring, the internal structure that took place in the summer school program, and how that could be generative and applicable to building the regular academic school year supports for comprehensive ELD. These are just examples of some of the beginning ELD modeling and artifacts that we collected in the classroom. It's again building on acknowledging where students were and where they come from. And we heard some in this left image, this left excerpt from one of the students, that they were in this classroom activity describing the flag, and some really poignant perspective of this particular student who talks about their flag, and that they indicated that red is the color about the act of murder. And that was just so compelling and touching and moving for us to be able to really hear that perspective and hear that opportunity that the student had to really voice that, because again, the counseling services that provided became part of the comprehensive support for newcomer students in this district. It was not without its challenges. There's an entire section of the report that we describe what the challenges were in San Juan Unified. And these challenges had a lot to do with ideological perspective and the ideological perspectives in which we're living, the socio-political time in which we're living in. So we come away with this, with many of the recommendations that you see here that resonate with what Sam just said, to really strengthen our policies at the state, local, and national level, to really uplift and uphold the assets-based narratives about the immigrant and refugee students' experiences and community in research and practice, and to really sustain the commitments that our state has had and maintain them in the promising practices that you hear here. And thank you for that. Please put your questions in the chat. We'll have an opportunity to talk about them a little bit later.
Thank you so much for that, Magali. We really appreciate you sharing those rich and nuanced insights from your visit to San Juan. We are going to transition now to Lauren Markham, who will share a case study from Oakland International High School. And I think it's particularly relevant at this time when the state of California has allocated over $4 billion for community schools through the CCSPP program. And districts are looking for some guidance for community schools in general, but we're particularly interested in how community schools can be leveraged to serve particularly vulnerable student groups such as newcomers. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lauren. Let's see, we'll just do it. Looks like we're having some
Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry
Okay,
for
there you go. Okay.
technical difficulties. I'm unable to unmute or put myself on video for some reason that is confusing to me. There we go. Thank you. Here we are. Thanks so much. Sorry about that. It's really such an honor to be here with all of you, and thank you so much to Pace, to Magali, and to Sam for their fantastic presentations. You're going to see me just clicking back through. Here we go. Yeah, I don't know what's we really practice this. I'll start talking, and then Jeannie, if you don't mind helping getting me back to the back. Oh, here we go. My thing is up. So my name is Lauren Markham, and I'm an educator who's been working in the intersection of immigration and education for a number of years, almost 20 years. And I am going to share a little bit about the community school model at Oakland International High School. As Jeannie mentioned, the state of California has invested a ton of resources, money, which is important, but also sort of a focus on on technical assistance and professional development in this area of a community school. And it's interesting because Sam in his presentation brought up the notion of like there's inside of school and there's outside of school. And actually the community school model is sort of saying like, well, there's inside the classroom, and then the school is actually something that is connected more broadly to students' lives. So that a school is sort of a hub for all the amazing services that Sam mentioned and talked about in his, and that also that Magali talked somewhat about in her presentation as well. That school, as we know, is not just a place, right, for academic learning to happen, or in the case of Newcomers, for language learning to happen. In fact, school is a place where it is, and there's a ton put on schools, right? There's expectations that educators, we've all heard this, that educators feel like they're social workers, or that they're therapists, or that they're trying to find their students doctors, right? And the idea of a community school model is, one, we want our students to be in school, and we know that so many of the reasons that our students don't succeed in school, and this is not just Newcomers, right? That so many of the reasons that students struggle or don't succeed, quote unquote, in the sort of academic matrices of school, has not always that much to do with what's happening in the classroom. It's vital what happens in the classroom, but there could be perfect scaffolding and perfect curriculum and perfect education, happening and happening in the classroom. But if a student, I always say this, has an abscessed tooth or has a pending immigration hearing and they don't have a lawyer, it's totally unreasonable to expect that they'll be able to focus on those academics, let alone, and sometimes even come to school at all. So the notion of the community school is that a school, because it's a place where we want students to be, and because it's an area where so often performance and access is impacted by these other services. The idea of a community school is that it's a place for students to get these other services and supports. And this is, it's almost obvious, but I want to just make sure I say that this is particularly important in the newcomer context, right? Where we have students who, in many cases, I can share at Oakland International High School, I've worked for many years, many of our newcomer students, their first interaction with any official or institution or any person in the United States was being arrested by a CBP officer, a Border Patrol officer, and put into ICE custody. We have students who, are coming not necessarily to a pre-established community network or family network. And so navigating the system and trying to figure out how to access resources outside of school is incredibly difficult, right? And also there's, of course, the language access that a lot of our students are coming speaking minority languages. Even those coming from Mexico and Central America are increasingly speaking indigenous languages. And so the notion of just sort of saying like, oh yeah, here's an address where you could maybe find free medical care, good luck. That's not exactly a recipe for success. So I'm going to talk briefly about Oakland International High School. Our mission is to provide quality student-centered learning experience for recently arrived immigrant students that values the multilingualism, cultural diversity, and many different ways of understanding the world that our students, families, and their communities contribute. And we are a full-service community school. That means that we have adopted, and this was sort of in tandem with Oakland Unified School District being the first school district to adopt a community school model many, back in around 2010, 2011. We became a full-service community school that was already very aligned with our mission and also our students' needs, that we know that for them to succeed in school, they deserve these additional supports. And we also know that community school, this model works. Here's a little bit about our demographics. So we have a large number of students from Mexico and Central America. I should share this is from last year because our student body is still forming. As many of us know here, newcomer students don't all just enroll in August in time for school to start, right? So we have a large number of students from Mexico and Central America. You can see Guatemala is by far the largest student population. There are about 6 different language groups within this, the 137 students from Guatemala. And we also tend to trend and have for the past 10 years or so, highly male students. Which also determines, what I want to share here is that a community school is not a set it and forget it model, that the community school needs to be responsive to the student needs and the student body, but also any school, the student body and the needs of the student body are constantly changing. So the community school model is something that we've built over time. I'm going to share about that, but it's also something that we're constantly revisiting and reimagining. So I want to share a little bit about the notion of the sort of tiered system. A community school is something that serves, right, the idea it serves the whole student in all of these different areas. I'm going to share what Oakland International High School does, but we imagine this in terms of tier. So tier 1 is, and if any of you are familiar with the restorative justice system, structure system, this kind of mirrors that. The notion of tier 1 is because what happens is when people are thinking about community, oh my God, we need for our students who are in care for our students who have never seen a doctor before. We need immigration attorneys for folks who have immigration hearings tomorrow. That is all true next week or next month or next year. That is all true. But what is often those are all what we consider tier 3 services, really focused, individuated services that reach a particular need of students. But the actual idea of a community school is that there are touch points for everybody and that there are sort of graduated opportunities for students and families and even the wider community and neighborhood to access services. And, I give many more examples in the report of this, but the idea of tier 1 is that this is stuff that bolsters community wellness and student success and that invites people in. So this is be like open, wellness events, our weekly food pantry where students and families can come get food, an international festival that's a celebration event, right? So these aren't things that are necessarily incredibly targeted or focused. They're actually the opposite. They're building community, building connection, and offering resources without sort of that aren't necessarily at the level of emergency. Tier 2 is a little bit more targeted, right? These are trainings that build student skills and capacities. So this might be leadership groups, or they might be after school programs, right? That like our program with Soccer Without Borders that people sign up for. So it's not just like open to everybody. It's not merely culture building. It is a little bit more targeted, but it's not this tier 3 individuated service. So I want to share briefly that this is work that really does take time. I remember going when I first started at Oakland International High School as the community school manager in 2011, I would go to presentations like this and just feel really like beleaguered because I would feel like, oh my gosh, we're never going to have a social worker. We're never going to be able to offer school-based health clinic services. We're never going like food bank. How would we possibly do that? So I wanted to share a little bit about the timeline because this is something that we built over time. And again, the report shares more about this. So we opened in 2007. We were approved in 2007. We were opened in 2007. We had 56 students. It wasn't until fall 2010 that the Oakland Unified School District was really, championing this idea of the full service community district and full service community school. And that had always been part of our goal and our model when we opened. We wanted this to be, in service to, we wanted to have a model like this. We weren't using the full service community school model, but but it took time. We had to figure out what math was. We had to figure out like our building. We had to, we were building a school from nothing. So we really didn't launch until 2011. We started, and our first years are focusing on, that community building and expanding mental health, and creating a partnership with a nearby clinic. In 2013, we got a grant from after school grant that allowed us to like build out a little bit more, right? And create more comprehensive after school programs. And then in 2013, 2014, there was a huge number of unaccompanied minors started enrolling in our school. And we had to pivot and say, okay, here's what our community school focus has been this. We need to pivot and we need to really be focusing on immigration legal services. And then in 2015, we opened what we call the Wellness Center, which is now our hub as a community school on campus. This is a little bit of information about what, and I'll just kind of like let you take a look at this, but the kinds of services our Wellness Center offers. And we have found that is a massively important best practice at our school, having a central physical hub so that service access is not contingent on a student knowing a particular staff member or feeling comfortable going up to that staff member, but there's actually a place on campus where students sort of in general know that if you have a question about some kind of socio-emotional outside of the classroom need, there's a place that you can go. And this, again, is something we've built all of these services over time. We did not start with this. And in fact, would not recommend to anyone sort of trying to build out their community school model to start with the everything, right? It's actually building and starting small is critical. I want to say, I'm going to wrap up, but I want to say that there's of course more information in the report, as I've said, but both David and I are available as part of our work at the Oakland International Learning Lab to do some degree of technical assistance. And we also have a visit to Oakland International High School to see some of these programs in action coming up in November. So with that, I'll turn it back over.
Thank you so much, Lauren. We appreciate getting the chance to get under the hood a bit to see what's going on at Oakland International, and also to get a sense of your journey for how you reached this point. And I will hand it over to David Hansen, who will describe some of the instructional and programmatic practices that support newcomer education. Thank you, David.
Thank you. So I'll just jump right into it. The first thing to know about Oakland Unified School District is that Oakland Unified School District has data tracking systems on newcomer students. So in the report, we look at those data tracking systems, and this is an example of the number of newcomers over their 2013 all the way through 2023, sort of broken down by their status. So an N0 being just arriving, and N1 being their first full year, N2 second full year, N3, etc. What we'll see is that in OUSD, about 8 to 10% of the overall student populations are newcomers, currently hold a newcomer tag. There is a higher percentage of those students represented at high school, right? So that's where the highest percentage of newcomers in OUSD are. Before we look at graduation data, though, I do want to say that in OUSD, there is a high representation of unaccompanied minors. Approximately 50% or more of newcomer students are currently unaccompanied minors in OUSD. There is a high percentage of students who have interrupted formal education, and there is a high percentage of students who have free and reduced lunch status, approximately 95 to 98%, which if you compare earlier to Sam's figure of 67% as a newcomer as a whole, you can see that OUSD has a particular population, though represented from a lot of different countries, has a particular subset of stronger sort of needs, both existing academically and sort of socially, financially. But what's really interesting or new, I think, in the field of newcomer education is that OUSD now has access to be able to look at graduation data for and controlled by newcomer status. So this is essentially the last 4 years of that data. Just real quick highlights here. Your non-newcomers in Oakland Unified School District graduated about 80% in a 4-year. This is a 4-year graduation rate, whereas it's compared to about 44% for newcomers. And the biggest number, of course, here is the dropout rate. The dropout rate is about 39% for newcomer students, compared to 8% for non-newcomer students in OUSD. And these newcomer tags represent approximately 20% of the graduating cohorts are newcomer students. So what that means ostensibly is that 20% of students has more dropouts in it than the rest of the student body. Now, if you control for looking at or comparing newcomer status to English learner status, right, you can see once again that English learners, while they have a lower percentage of graduation, 71.6%, when you remove the newcomers from them, that rate is much higher than you see for newcomers as well. And similar trends hold for dropout rates as well. The interesting thing, of course, is that there are lots of different school sites in Oakland Unified, and they have very different outcomes, right? So you're looking at a range of dropping out percentages from 63.6% to 24.1%. And these are all the major hubs. There are essentially 5 major newcomer hubs at the high school level. In terms of this data, this is actually publicly accessible data. So anybody who's curious can go on to Oakland Unified School District's data dashboard and control for newcomer status, and they can essentially find the same data themselves. You can see sort of in the middle here, the school that Lauren and I have talked about and worked at for many years, Oakland International. You're sort of comparing some of those rates. One of the interesting things in Oakland Unified as well is there is a continuation school specifically for newcomer students in a continuation school program. And if you're looking at those percentages, right, they're not adding up to 100%, right? The 4-year graduation rate, dropout rate, and newcomer, it's often because students are not graduating within 4 years, but they are eventually graduating, right? And the rate of that is much higher for newcomer students as well. So looking at that sort of data and having the experience of being in Oakland International, there's a couple different key takeaways that I think districts should consider, as should the state. So the first thing any district should consider is some form of data tagging to be able to track specific outcomes for newcomer students. That's pretty simple. Well, it takes a little bit of work, but tracking where a newcomer comes and eventually keeping that tag, allowing you to see, okay, what are graduation rates? What are attendance rates? That sort of thing. One of the other things, of course, that would help with, and this is the third point, is programs that can accommodate mid-year arrivals. So if in the data tracking for OUSD, we could see that more than 50% of students who are coming that year arrive past the first 20-day count. So you really actually need to build out programs that accommodate students and have seats available for students who won't be arriving at the beginning of the year. Another thing that's really crucial that I think a lot of districts struggle with, and that Oakland Unified takes a really firm stance on, is that we have the ability to enroll newcomers through graduation at age 21. What does that mean? Well, as the law is currently written, of course, we have to provide opportunities for education through the age 18, but we can also provide through age 21, before the 22nd birthday. So in Oakland Unified School District, what that means is we enroll students at high school by credits, how many credits they have, meaning that those students are on average quite a bit older. And then the recommendation for elementary school, though, would be to graduate by age. So the last couple of things that I will just say for the state, very similar things that many of my colleagues have mentioned. So there's just data tracking that needs to happen. There's a few things around SIFE students, definitions and supports, unaccompanied minor support. Some of that has already been coming, but really this stuff that I'm mentioning here has been mentioned already. So I do want to make sure we do wrap it up now because I know we're ending on time. So I'll pass it over.
Hey, thank you so much for that, David. And I wanted to take this time to thank all of our panelists, Sam, Magali, Lauren, and David. And everyone is encouraged to find their publications to learn more. I know all our panelists had to kind of zip through some very rich content. So we do encourage you to go to each of those publications to learn more. And unfortunately, we're out of time, so we're right at time now. But just wanted to thank you for joining us, and wanted to draw your attention to an upcoming PACE seminar that we have in person in Sacramento. So if you find yourself in Sacramento on October 13, you're encouraged to come to this event on declining enrollment, school closures, and equity considerations. Thank you again for joining us. for this content on newcomer education. And thanks again to our panelists. Bye, everyone.